Joining us is Charles Hoskinson, co-founder of the blockchain engineering company Input Output and the Cardano blockchain. Charles, welcome to the Crypto Mile.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
Let's start with the subject of decentralization. Why do you think we need a more decentralized world?
We want to live in a global society, and if you want to live in a global society, one of the first things you don't want is for one actor in that global society to have complete control over critical things, resources. That can be energy, your identity, supply chains, your food. That can be water. You don't really want a situation where one actor is in charge of that whole show, because what they can do is say, hey, you know, I don't like you, Brian, so I'm just going to cut off your power or your water or your access to the internet or these types of things. We see that, for example, with events in Yemen or in Ethiopia or other places. Certain people are not really so favored, and now all of a sudden, like, a wall's been basically built around them and they have no access to basic things. Or what Russia is trying to do in Ukraine, for example, especially during the beginning part of the invasion. So the point of cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology is they take those resources that should be kind of a public good, and if they're digitizable, get them into a situation where they're completely open and basically then build businesses on top of that, but the underlying infrastructure is no longer controlled.
Do you think we're coming to the end of nation-state power? And if so, what kind of global structures are going to evolve in a post-state world?
I don't really view it as let's get rid of the nation state. What happens is you can start taking lots of government services and put them into a structure where they have radical transparency and they have exponential growth and capabilities. Suddenly, all of your tax revenue is open source and everybody can look at it and see where the money's going. All of your government interactions are now completely digital native, and they have programmable interfaces, and anybody can build applications for it. Everything's open source. Everything is programmable at the edges. So you now have a way of doing global regulation without putting a nation state in charge of everything, like what the role the United States had in the 20th century, and increasingly the role that China is trying to assert in the 21st century. At the end of the day, you have less friction, less fraud, less waste, less abuse, more transparency, and ultimately less consolidation of power. And that's really what our industry sells in a nutshell. And it does it in a way that nation states can't tamper with it. China doesn't have a back door. America doesn't have a back door. If it's truly a permissionless ledger, the least amongst us, the poorest person, the most vulnerable person, has equal access as the president of the United States does. There's never been a time in human history that that's been the case.
Do you still see that decentralization, it works on, globally and for lots of different sectors, but there are still areas that don't need to be decentralized because, like, the centralized legacy systems are working fine?
If we're talking about energy resources, water resources, information resources, your ability to express yourself or interface with the marketplace, it's dangerous at a social scale that a small group of unelected people could have a fundamental control over that and be able to completely decide whether you're legitimate or not. Because you piss those people off, they basically just disappear you from society and destroy your ability to express yourself. So really, it's a case-by-case basis. But what's nice about it is you can always go in one direction. It's very easy to go from decentralization to centralization. It's much harder to go in the other direction, from centralization to decentralization. So my view is take the foundational stuff and make that all decentralized. And then what you do is you add layers of centralization in.
How many countries in the world are actually considering this at this moment in time?
A lot have. For example, the concept of a digital government. Estonia has been one of the world leaders there. The country of Georgia is also pursuing it. There's a lot of work in Singapore. In the United States, states like Wyoming are starting to, they even have like digital agency for DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. They passed 31 blockchain laws in the last 3 years. So I'd say probably another 5 to 10 years before the world moves in that direction. But blockchain is a very powerful thing, and almost every country has done some form of pilot for a blockchain-based system to store these types of things. It really comes down to, are you going to do it in a permissionless way or a permission way? In other words, will the country control the ledger, or will that ledger be an open global ledger? And we've seen countries explore both. They've used Ethereum and Bitcoin. Others have used Fabric from Hyperledger and Corda and so forth. That said, big Fortune 500 companies are prepping.
And that's where Cardano have come in African countries. So Ethiopia, Kenya.
Yeah, Ethiopia in particular with the credential management system for the students, and 5 million students will have their K through 12 records digitized in this way. And it's, again, that fidelity hash. And so what's on the Cardano blockchain will be a hash. But then you as a student, when you show your transcript to Oxford or to Cambridge or wherever you're applying, they can verify that that's been signed by the Ethiopian Ministry of Education, and that's a real credential. And then you go beyond that. You can go professional licenses, like are you a lawyer, are you a doctor? You can go into like visas, travel permits, these types of things. And eventually you can go for compliance for payments and for bank accounts and other such things. It's the same stack of technology for all that stuff.
Now, just before I go, Cardano has always been accused of, like it's kind of like the tortoise and the hare, moving so slow. So do you think that's your approach was basically everything has to be peer reviewed and we're going to work at it, make sure it's all watertight, and then we spring?
I think there's a misnomer about how slow we actually are, so I fundamentally reject that. Oh, look, Cardano's so slow. We were one of the first of the third generations to be in market with proof of stake. Ethereum is still not on proof of stake. And they had a 2-year head start on us. And we chose the slowest, most systematic way of building a proof of stake protocol through the peer-reviewed process. They did not. They did the whole engineering move fast and break things, and they're still not on that standard. We were the first with extended UTXO, us and Ergo, and we're now, Bitcoin's had 13 years to figure out how to do smart contracts. We're the first to do that type of model. We've grown from nothing to a multi-million person ecosystem. And so it irritates me a little bit when people say we're so slow. But, let's say even if that's the case, well, then you really have to ask yourself, well, what is the point of this infrastructure? The point of this infrastructure is to be around for hundreds of years. So taking an additional 6 months to a year or 2 years to do it right, you have to live with the consequences of your design long term.
You're saying Cardano has really robust governance systems for the protocols, and that just gets me to a question about so whoever actually updates the protocols, they're going to have a lot of power as to how the blockchain is run. And so what kind of governance systems, what does that mean? Does that mean people that own ADA get to vote, or is there like governance tokens? Is that's
the direction we're moving in? Everybody who has ADA gets to decide, and then you put in lots of checks and balances. You have to create a members-based open source program, and there's a lot of great examples of how to do that with the Linux Foundation and the Apache Foundation in particular, because these are programs that North Korea, South Korea, Iran, or Israel, Russia, China, and America don't all exactly get along, yet every one of them are consumers of Linux. So there are ways that you can create checks and balances and create a decentralized way of managing an open source program. And we're kind of in the weeds right now as an ecosystem, getting all those details sorted out. But your innovation has to come from a decentralized source. It can't come from a person. People retire, they get co-opted, they die. So you have to use peer review process, and you have to know that the software that you have works. So how do you know that? Well, you know that with an evidence-based software development program. And this is what we do for the aerospace industry. It's why people trust airplanes. It's why people trust rockets.
Charles Hoskinson, thank you very much for coming on the Crypto Mile.
This was a heck of a lot of fun. Thank you so much.